Hi, new normal and hello freshman students from the BSEMT. Welcome back to our YouTube channel. Well, in today's video, we're going to discuss about biodiversity and healthy society. So sit back, listen, and enjoy learning. And these are the learning outcomes for today's discussion. At the end of the lesson, the student should be able to first, discuss the concept of biodiversity. Second, determine the interrelatedness of society, environment, and health. Third, perform a biodiversity mini-cosplay activity. Fourth, discuss the ethics and implication of genetically modified organisms or GMOs and their political future impacts. And lastly, appreciate the value of conserving biodiversity. Now let us fasten our seatbelt as we discuss the role of biodiversity and healthy society.
10, 9, 8, 7, 6, 5, 4, 3, 2, 1, 0.
Now let us begin by knowing what biodiversity means. The term biodiversity was first coined by Walter G. Rosen in 1986. It comes from the Greek word bios, meaning life, and the Latin term diversitas, meaning variety. Biological diversity, abbreviated as biodiversity, represent the sum total of various life forms such as unicellular fungi, protozoa, bacteria, and multicellular organisms such as plants, fishes, and mammals at various biological levels including genes, habitats, and ecosystem. The biosphere comprises a complex collection of innumerable organisms known as the biodiversity, which constitute the vital life support for survival of human race. This means that biodiversity is the variety of life forms on Earth and essential interdependence of all living organisms. As defined as in the convention that initiated the study of biological diversity at Rio de Janeiro in Brazil in 1992, that was actively attended by 154 countries. Biodiversity is the variability among living organisms from all sources, including terrestrial, marine, and other aquatic ecosystems, and the ecological complexes of which they are a part. This includes biodiversity within species, between species, and of ecosystem. According to the International Union for Conservation of Nature in 1998, biodiversity is the variety and variability of species of their population, the variety of species of their life forms, the diversity of the complex association with species with their interaction and their ecological processes which influences perform. Now let us proceed to the different types of biodiversity. Biodiversity has three types, namely species diversity, ecosystem diversity, and the genetic diversity. Let us first discuss about species diversity. Species diversity is measurement of biodiversity in a particular ecological community. It characterizes the species richness or the number of species thriving in ecological community. the abundance or the number of individuals per species, and also the distribution or evenness of species. Species diversity is a standard that can be utilized to evaluate the condition of ecosystem. In a healthy ecosystem, a diversity or a diverse and balanced number of species exist and maintain the equilibrium of the ecosystem. Second is the ecosystem diversity. The different types of genetic diversity such as terrestrial or aquatic, natural or artificial, are sustained due to their strategic geographical locations on Earth. Temperate regions are home of the deciduous forests where the trees are adapted to the changing of the four seasons, while the equatorial regions have the tropical rainforests which are exposed to the wet and dry seasons. Thus, plants that are thrive in the Arctic region differ greatly in the adaptive characteristics as compared with those in the tropics. Third is genetic diversity. During reproduction, the fertilized egg cell involves a series of cell divisions that produce individuals with a distinctive assemblage of genes. No individual members of any population, except identical twins, which develop from a single egg, are precisely identical in genetic makeup. Moreover, the larger a population's genetic diversity, the more likely it is to develop specific characteristics that permits it to adjust to new environmental pressures, such as climate change or disease. In contrast, for those with a low degree, such pressures might drive a population to extinction. Now let's move on to the interaction of the three types of biological diversity. The three concentric circles shown in the interplay of the ecosystem, species, and genetic diversity. The core genetic diversity involves the differences in the genetic makeup of the various species that survive in the different ecosystem found in the biosphere. Conversely, the ecosystem dictate the type of species that are fit to survive in them. Thus, their genetic makeup allows them to do so. Now let us discuss the different distribution of biodiversity. Flora and fauna diversity depends on climate, altitude, soil, and presence of other species, and we will be discussing them one by one. Now let us discuss first about climate. Biodiversity affects climate at local, regional, and global levels, and consequently modifications in the land use and land cover that affect biodiversity and can affect climate. The significant mechanism of biodiversity comprise plant functional diversity and the type and distribution of ecosystems across globe. Second is altitude. Altitude affects the biodiversity in an inverse manner. Low altitude are more diverse than higher altitude. This happens because as we move up, the atmosphere becomes less dense, and because of this, shortage of oxygen means fewer species are able to sustain life on higher altitudes. Third is soils. Soils are complex systems. Organisms living in soils and the mineral and nutrient components act together to produce high diversity and complexity, feeding back to biodiversity richness through habitat and nutrient provision. Court is the presence of other species. Organisms interact with other organisms in an ecosystem. These interactions, such as predation, parasitism, commensalism, and other symbiotic relationships, may be beneficial or harmful effects to the biodiversity of an area. Also, the introduction or reduction of new species in an ecosystem may also positively or negatively affect the other species by limiting or reducing their population or contrariwise. The predominant group is that of the animals, with a total of 1,293,325 known species to date. This followed by plants with a registered number of 365,815 species, then fungi, with its number of species summing up to 135,110. Chromista, with a total of 23,522 species follows, and bacteria, as well as viruses trailing beyond at 9,980 and 3,186. These add up to a total of 1,834,001 known species in the world. Most of the world's most diverse regions are concentrated in the tropics, since these regions receive the most amount of sunlight in a year. Consequently, diverse plants are able to grow and survive well. This would also mean that more nutrients are available to support more types of organisms to live. Now let us talk about biodiversity hotspot. A region with a high amount of biodiversity that undergoes habitat damage by anthropological activities, or also known as human activities, is called as biodiversity hotspot. In order to qualify as such, according to the Conservation International, a region must contain at least 1,500 species of vascular plants, or equal to greater than 0.5% of the world's total, as endemic, which means it must have a high percentage of plant life found nowhere else on the planet. A hotspot, in other words, is rare and it cannot be replaced. A hotspot must also have 30% or less of its original natural vegetation. In other words, it has to be endangered. To date, across the globe, 36 areas qualify as hotspots. They embody just 2.4% of the Earth's land surface, but they sustain more than half of the world's plant species as endemic and nearly 43% of the bird, mammals, reptile, and amphibian species as endemic. The Biodiversity Hotspot map produced by the Conservation International get a better view of the location of biodiversity hotspot around the world. Conservation International specifies 36 biodiversity hotspots around the world. All are severely threatened by habitat loss and degradation, causing other conservation critical to protecting nature for the advantage of all life on Earth. Now let us watch this video clip that talks about biodiversity, a balance to nature.
The Philippines is one of the 17 mega-diverse countries in the world. It is home to the most diverse species of life, whether plants, animals, mostly found nowhere else in the world. Having one of the world's longest coastline at 37,008 kilometers long, the Philippines has an estimated 26,000 square kilometers of coral reefs, containing mangroves, reef fish, seagrass, algae, whales and dolphins, and marine turtles. Biodiversity is the engine that breathes life into all nature systems on which human life depends. From taming nature's destructive powers by keeping the chemical balance in our atmosphere to putting order in the Earth's climatic patterns, biodiversity is key to the perpetuity of human life. Biodiversity contributes to three major needs of human beings, namely health, food, and energy. In the pharmaceutical industry, some 50% of our medicines today are from natural sources. Biodiversity contributes to food production and human nutrition. Biodiversity contributes to industry, timber, and energy sources. Trees absorb carbon dioxide from the atmosphere, helping the Earth from overheating. Killer typhoons are brought about by the warming of the planet. Massive flooding and landslides are results of the denudation of forests. Illegal wildlife trade and forest loss now threaten the world's biodiversity, especially in the Philippines, which is now listed as one of the world's hotspots for biodiversity loss. Human activities such as illegal logging, irresponsible mining, unsustainable farming, and overfishing have a direct impact on the environment. The lack of concern with regards to our collective human impact towards the environment, such as neglect to consider alternative renewable sources of energy, disregarding the concept of conservation, failure to reduce our individual consumption, as well as our failure to recycle reusable materials, further strains the already weak ecosystem. It is said that man may have unknowingly started to dig his own grave with the loss of biodiversity. The impact of human actions towards the environment is putting a strain on the delicate balance between human demands and long-term sustainability. If left to continue on its own present destructive path, biodiversity may soon become only a living memory etched in photographs and video clips. It's not yet too late. Together, we can conserve resources and save our habitat. Each of us would need to do our own part in reversing environmental destruction. Simple actions such as proper disposal of waste, repairing leaking faucets, replacing incandescent bulbs with energy-efficient ones will go a long way to ease the pressure on our weakened environment. not patronizing illegally traded wildlife will ensure the survival of countless species and would go a long way to conserve our biodiversity. Farming of wild animals and plants, rather than extraction from their natural habitat, should also be encouraged among Filipinos. Education through visits and interactions with protected biodiversity sites nationwide would serve as an eye-opener on the richness and diversity of plant and animal life in the country. Buying products that help advocacies on sustainability ensures that there would be a justifiable and continuous source of the merchandise. This would also assure the grassroots communities in the country of a sustainable livelihood. Recognizing and respecting the rights of indigenous communities in managing their sacred sites such as forests, rivers, lakes, and caves, and promoting and supporting sustainable tourism will help sustain biodiversity conservation. Government programs such as identifying institutions that promote sustainable practices foster long-term awareness of our shared responsibility towards biological diversity conservation. Let us share the responsibility. Conserve our biodiversity for our children's children and for future generations.
Now, to sum up the different benefits of biodiversity, this includes balance of nature, biological productivity, regulation of climate, degradation of waste, cleaning of air and water, cycling of nutrients, control of potential pest and disease-causing species, detoxification of soil and sediments, stabilization of land against erosion, carbon sequestration and global climate change, and lastly, maintenance of soil fertility. While we are benefiting with the goodness of biodiversity, biodiversity is being threatened in two major causes. First is the natural causes, and we also have the anthropological causes, or also known as human activity. Now, let us discuss more about the natural causes and its type. First is we have the natural causes. These are the threats that occurs in nature and are considered inevitable. Natural causes includes the following. First, narrow geographical area. The narrower the area of a certain community, the lesser the number of species that will be able to thrive in it. Second is low population. The lesser the number of individuals to procreate, the lower the biodiversity in an area. Third, low breeding rate. The slower the breeding rate of the individuals, the less diverse it is. Fourth, and the last, natural disaster. The occurrence of natural calamities causes the destruction of habitats of various species, thus diminishes biodiversity. We also have the second major threats to biodiversity, which is known as the anthropogenic causes or also known as human activity. And this includes the following. First, alteration and destruction of ecosystems. Second, the famous palm oil is extracted. Third, hunting and exploitation of animals. Fourth, agricultural practices. Fifth, introduction of exotic species. 6. Climate change. 7. Tourism. 8. Ignorance. While there are threats in biodiversity, we can also have conservation of biodiversity. Humans can be smarter about how we can utilize our oceans, freshwater, and land resources, how energy, food, and other necessities are produced. Scientists have the knowledge and competence to shift towards a better future for both people and nature to coexist. Experts are already discovering new methods to feed humanity's growing population, meet its energy demands, and manage its global water supply. The need for governments to commit to cease the destruction, begin reversing the loss, and start restoring nature to more sustainable level is the key. Now, it is the time to support these solutions to ensure that everyone gets a fair share without the destruction of nature. First is we have biodiversity inventories. Second, conserving biodiversity in protected habitats such as in situ conservation and ex situ conservation. Third, it's a restoration of biodiversity. Fourth, imparting environmental education. Fifth, enacting, strengthening, and enforcing environmental legislation. 6. Reviewing the agricultural practices. 7. Controlling urbanization. 8. Conservation through biotechnology. And lastly, we have population control. The next decade sees historic moments when world's leader will make key decisions as regarding the environmental, climate, and sustainable development. These decisions will also set the agenda for the world's future. Collectively, people can help shape these global decisions and deliver a message that it has no longer accepted to continuously ruin nature to its dark end, and that human can take a different and a brighter part. Before I end our discussion, let me share to you with this quotation. We should treasure all scrap of biodiversity as priceless, while we learn to use it and come to understand what it means to humanity. And these are the references that I may use for this topic. Thank you for learning with me today, but please don't forget to click the like button and subscribe. See you on my next discussion. Goodbye!
Spread on for me. Ooh.